But the poor person does not exist as an inescapable fact of destiny. His or her existence is not politically neutral, and it is not ethically innocent. The poor are a byproduct of the system in which we live and for which we are responsible. They are marginalized by our social and cultural world. They are the oppressed, exploited proletariat, robbed of the fruit of their labor and despoiled of their humanity. Hence, the poverty of the poor is not a call to generous relief action, but a demand that we go and build a different social order.
Yeah, so those two quotes I think really do embody uh, what the system looks like and why we need to work against that, how we need to change that. Um, because is not, silence and apathy are not neutral, as Gutierrez says. They really do enable that broken and abusive system. Um, are there any thoughts, responses, opinions that folks want to share about those two quotes? Yeah, Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, so I definitely appreciate that perspective. I was a follower of Dorothy Day and Peter Moore in the
Mm-hmm.
Catholic worker movement for many years, and it's important. It's a great perspective to have. But another way of looking at it is there sort of that is it the individual's fault or is it society's fault, right? Sort of liberal conservative dichotomy. And another way of looking at it is saying that we can strengthen the individual as well, right? Like so with say police brutality or something like that, you have situations that arise from people being angry, people from being, stressed out and unbalanced and unable to address their emotions, right? So one other way of looking at it is through society would be a better place, like there's that conflict mode, and I've been arrested for civil disobedience, at Fort Benning, Georgia, and it's valid, it's definitely one way of looking at it. But also it doesn't have to be that way, where it has to be about conflict, right? Where one side opposes the other side, right? And through everyone meditating and learning breath work, yoga, that we can learn to manage our own minds. And it's another way too of addressing these same situations. So I'll throw that out there.
No, that is certainly something. And I really think it's a strong both and. I think there's ripple effects in from society and out from individuals. Um, I do think that a more, uh, this could be a philosophy conversation. We should have more of those. Um, but I think that it is certainly a both and. I talk a lot, or I was just the other day presenting actually at the Lutheran Power in the Spirit conference. I don't think we have any Lutherans on the call, but that was really awesome. Um, and we talked about how, like, you need to do, what did Gutierrez call it? You need to do that, that support and direct action. Um, oh, ¿Dónde fue? But you also do need to do the social change. You need the generous relief action, and you also need the different social order. You need the internal support for an individual's emotions so that it's not anger motivating turmoil at the honestly the individual and the systemic level. Hang out with legislators someday and you will see the importance of emotional regulation. But it is also true that um, creating a society in which the rules make it easier to support those who need it um, makes it easier to manage the emotions. So I think there's ripples in both directions, and I think that's definitely true. Catherine, yes, I see your hand up.
Actually, you kind of ended up saying what I was going to say. I think that it's often understated the psychological toll of poverty.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Poverty, I forgot who it said this, but um, part of poverty lives in the mind. And so there is a great deal of emotional and mental stress um, that comes with living in that rung of society.
Yeah.
I have been fortunate or unfortunate enough to be on both sides of that equation. I've been on the side of, that those $10 boots are the only thing we can afford. And I've been on the, the $50 boots make sense, right? We've definitely had the conversations, like you can buy the $50 boots once, you can buy the $10 boots like 10 times.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that, like, people who live in and on that rung of society, they understand already when they get those $10 boots that they're going to have to buy it again and again
Yeah.
and again. And it's just this deep psychological, almost like trauma, right?
Mm.
And I think that it's almost like we have to ask ourselves, do we want to empower the individual so that they can like withstand their poverty better? Or do we want to change the fabric of the society they live in so that they have the space and the room to do things like focus on mental health, right? Because if all of your resources are poured into survival, mental health is just not a priority. Even though counterintuitively, those people who live in that space need them more than anything.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Um, thank you. Thank you for sharing, because all of that. And in fact, I was looking up. So I've got two screens here, which is why I keep glancing over to my left. I was looking up the Poor People's Campaign, which is a national call for moral revival. Right. It originated in North Carolina and William Barber, but has since spread to be all over the country. Um, but it talks about the economic, the social, and the mental health costs of poverty. Um, poverty costs more than $1 trillion a year. Unstable housing for families will cost the U.S. $111 billion in the next 10 years. Hunger, people being hungry, costs $160 billion per year in increased healthcare and educational and poorer educational outcomes. It doesn't make sense. And yet we keep doing it. And those are the policies that we leave in place for because they are what we're used to, and
Convenient.
that's what we want to not do. So I will a few more examples. I want to talk a little bit about what this does look like. On the micro level, we can think about the boots, or literal shoes for us. But also like buying in bulk. Like if you get the single serving of ramen at the grocery store, it's $1. If you get the 100 pack of ramen, it's like $10. And that's ramen. Like look at rice, look at beans, look at whatever, look at produce. Um, the idea that buying in bulk gives you a discount, or that there are overdraft fees for banks. Like if you have less money in your account, you're more likely to be charged money for spending money, which is backwards. Or if not backwards, at least not helpful. At the very least, it's not helpful. Um, this is also true of just so many things in our daily lives. Healthcare. An emergency room visit is significantly more expensive than preventative care for an individual and for society. However, if you don't have funds to cover that preventative care, uh, an emergency room is the only place that can't turn you away. And therefore, that is the amount of cost that you're going to bear when things get insurmountable and you absolutely need the help. Whether that be a heart attack or a stroke, or just like if you have asthma and you're just dealing with not being able to breathe on a daily basis until at some point you like can't breathe so much you go to the emergency room, then it's also just a much worse health situation that you're having to respond to. This is a big part of why Virginia Interfaith has been working so hard to expand Medicaid. In 2018, we got Medicaid expanded um, to more folks based on income level. And then in recent years, we've worked to get Medicaid for pregnant mothers who were not documented. So at least for that prenatal care and that first year of life, they and their child could be covered. And this year and likely next year, we're working on a proposal to get undocumented kids covered by Medicaid if their families qualify based on income, because the kids need health care and we might as well. It's so much less expensive for society, but also better for everyone on an individual level to get people covered. So that's one aspect. Another similar one are evictions, and this is something that VICPP has worked on as well, right? Like if you owe next to nothing, if you owe $1 of rent, you can get taken to court for eviction, which is expensive for everyone, for the city, for the judge, for the circuit court, for the clerks, but most particularly for the person being evicted. For the landlord, true, but also for the person. Oh, sorry. Thank you for messaging me in the chat. I know that my microphone is acting wonky today and I apologize. Is this better? Okay, I will just hold it right in front of my mouth. I'll play with the tech support after. This idea of people getting evicted for these relatively small funds, and then that eviction sits on somebody's record for an indeterminate amount of time and makes it more difficult for them to find housing later, as well as being a large debt that they have to pay off, is absurd. So like VICPP worked with Virginia Poverty Law Center and others last year on a bill, and we'll likely be looking at it again this coming year, on a bill that said if you owe below a certain amount, then you can't go straight to eviction court. You have to at least offer some kind of payment plan, because people were getting evicted for less than $500, and that's just not good for anyone. So these sorts of things, but society allows it because it's convenient and it's what we've done forever, and that means the landlord can rent out that unit for a higher price in the coming months or whatever the case may be, right? There's a lot of interests involved, but as a society, it doesn't make sense and it's not good. It's not only is it not fiscally responsible, it also is not humanly compassionate. And so that's what we want to work to change. Additionally, on a macro level, you look at things like tax breaks. Um, uh, One of the key themes in Poverty by America, and you may have seen that we are running a book study on that in August. We're opening a second session actually because our Tuesday sessions have almost entirely filled up. So we're going to open a Wednesday session as well. But one of the themes is that actually true that direct aid, like sending checks to people's homes, we don't even send checks to people's homes, but things like food stamps and Section 8 rental assistance, those serve people who are lower incomes. But a thing that folks don't talk about a lot in the policy conversation are tax breaks, and how higher income individuals are often paying a lower rate in taxes than lower income individuals because they're saving money on things like sales tax and capital gains and inheritance and mortgage tax credits and stuff that they don't need, and that reduces their tax burden in a way. So in a very concrete manner, Matthew Desmond in Poverty by America talks about the US government subsidizes the rich and fails to subsidize the poor. And this has real concrete consequences for people's everyday lives. Thoughts, opinions, feedback on this? It's a lot. There's more to
Uh,
say. There's whole books about it. Oh yeah, go ahead. Patrick and then
I'll say
Catherine. Go
something.
ahead.
Somebody just said this is it. We do this because it's convenient and this way we always done it. I mean, that's not really. I don't know if that. Let's say what it is. It's hate, greed.
Agreed. Yeah,
We.
that's true.
I know we're nonpartisan, but I think we all know who peddles this crap. But
To be
I
fair,
think
both
that
parties peddle it. That's why we need to
yeah,
hold
but
them accountable.
I know that, but
One
we
may be
know
stronger
who.
than the other.
Right. That's a nice way of putting it. And that is expanded, and all these people voting for these people, whether it's a presidential candidate or a senator or a congressman, and destroying themselves economically because they hate. And you can't just saying that, of course, is not going to help. I think most people in this conversation probably agree with that statement. But trying to educate folks who have no business voting for these people and should be voting for people who have their economic interests at heart, whether it's through a better tax code, a more progressive tax code. Of course, we subsidize the rich, whether it is for making investments now so we don't have to spend billions later, less building of prisons. The list just goes on and on and on and on. And what can we do? I mean, to have some outreach there to educate people, because all they're hearing are vote for me, I'll give you a big tax cut, and I'll take care of black people for you, or gay people, whatever, whoever the boogeyman is for you. We got to fight that, and the only way to fight that is to educate that that you're killing yourself and your family because of your hate.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, is there any part of our organization that does any of that stuff? Education with that? I mean, I know it's nonpartisan, but we to a certain extent, you got to say the truth. I mean, you can't just be nonpartisan and stick your head in the sand and say both parties do it. Both parties don't do it all. I get so tired of listening to that. And so we need to say what it is. I guess that's what I'm doing right now. And perhaps we ought to have some education here as we lead up into our elections in November, which will tell us a whole lot about what kind of people we are in the Commonwealth.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think you're right. I think we need to do a better job of educating and advocating or doing that outreach specifically to congregations and faith communities that may not naturally discover us, because we've got on our wall over there, all faiths believe in justice. All faith communities can say, yes, we believe in taking care of the poor. Okay, if you believe in taking care of the poor, these are the policy changes that will help take care of the poor. Let's support politicians who will see these policy changes done. So
but they don't know which politicians they are. That's part of the problem. They're not connecting the dots. And then those politicians, I forgot, I hate black people, so I don't want to do that. I mean, I'm saying it the way it is, and I'm being very base here, but that's what goes on. I mean, that is the reality of it. Republicans are very good at that.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you. Definitely thoughts and conversations to continue as I continue to wear my nonpartisan hat, but I appreciate that. So thank you, Patrick. I saw Catherine's hand up first, and then Mary Beth was the next. So I'm going in the order I've seen people. Go ahead.
So I just had a couple of things. So we were discussing how all of these policies and the way that we conduct business as a society are not beneficial to us economically as a whole. And I do agree that there is a part of that is rooted in greed, because the poor have always been an easy mark to be exploited. But I do think it's really important to understand that in our societal culture, poverty is seen as a moral failing. So a lot of these policies are in place. Sure, they make money, but they're also in place to punish. We as a society love nothing more than to punish our poor. Because if you're poor, you didn't work hard enough, or you are inherently incapable. And so I think part of what's difficult of doing this work is trying to address that culture that goes beyond just passing legislation. It's this fundamental shift in how we see different people in our society. And I wanted to speak a little bit to what Patrick was saying about so many people who vote against their better interests. And this is a quote that I reference a lot. I'm sure you guys have heard it. It was by, I think it was Lyndon B. Johnson. And he said, if you can convince the lowest white man he's better than the best colored man, he won't notice you're picking his pocket. Hell, give him somebody to look down on and he'll empty his pockets for you. So the thing is, a lot of these votes are coming from a place of emotion. And so I know that fundamentally, we wish that we can educate people out of their prejudice. But when it comes down to the job, I think is harder. We have to speak on an emotional level to them and to address the emotional triggers that make them make these decisions that harm them. I wish we could just sit down with people and be like, here are the numbers. But people, but they don't care about the numbers. What they care about is a narrative that they've been fed and a fear that they have. And we have an impossible task of addressing those emotional fears and helping people understand that there is not a sect of our society that is actively stealing from you, and this is why you're poor. It is almost worse than that. The system is built so that there is a base level of poverty to be exploited for the gain of the top percent of people.
Yeah.
Amen, sister. And that was Lyndon Johnson. You are correct.
Love this. Catherine, I just want to pick your brain for hours on end. This is great. Mary Beth, you had your hand up, although not the Zoom hand, but your real hand. So I want to give you a chance to talk briefly.
I sometimes I feel like our churches and are really complicit in this. To me, the silence and the apathy, the idea that our churches are really great about food drives and, but it's like we want to be the conduit to charity, but we don't want to be the conduit to social justice for fear of alienating, members within the church. And I think we do a disservice to the gospel when we do not really speak to the full message of what we're called to do through the church. And, I was in politics for years and years and years. And I just feel like, it is beyond partisan, but if we as the church are not kind of, and I mean capital C, not willing to stand up and take, advocate, then I do feel like we're complicit, and I really find it hard to break through to that. And I would love.
I think you're absolutely right. I think that this is 90% of the reason why all of you, I think, are here today. That those as congregational liaisons, as members of churches, Art of Living Foundation, and the mosque or whatever, you're able to speak from the inside. Now, that being said, you're right. Having the charity versus justice conversation, having the what does it mean to truly stand up? There's in Catholic social teaching, there's a phrase called the preferential option for the poor. And I can count on, you know, two hands the number of people I knew who knew that phrase before I told it to them. And I can count on like one finger the number of people who really like put that into policy. But we need to. If we call ourselves a moral authority, then we absolutely must be on the forefront. This is why we've got our 100%. This is why we've got our living wage certified congregations, because if we're not paying our people enough to live on, how can we claim to want that? This is why we've got our 100% voting congregations, because exactly like what Patrick was saying, like we want to, and what Mary Beth was saying, we have to take the lead and get to know the candidates and know what the policies are and vote for our values. Andrew, you've had your hand up for a while, so go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, I gotta push back, that I think it's lazy, to say that lower income people, lower income white people are racist, who wrote Republican are racist. And I think if someone says something that's overtly racist, yeah, call it out. And I think that there's a lot of hypocrisy. I see a lot of, white majority congregations that love to go around pointing the finger at other people, calling people racist or whatever, that are still pretty segregated, right? When I lived in Louisiana, I had a friend, right? And he told me that another reason why people may vote against their own interest is because they don't identify with being poor, right? People don't identify with what they're making right now, right? Someone that might be a waiter, but in the next 5 years, they see themselves being a banker or, something more prestigious, well-paying. So they don't identify with the wage that they're making now, but they may identify with a wealthier class, despite the fact that they are poor, right? I collect welfare benefits myself because I have a severe psychiatric disability. And I think I think that attitude is very counterproductive, right? That there's many, many reasons why, poor white people may oppose welfare benefits, right? As a Catholic worker, one of the perspectives was that the government welfare state was sinful. The provision of the government providing welfare services violated the commandment to love thy neighbor, right? Because Jesus told us to love our neighbor ourselves, not to pay the government to do it for us. So there's another perspective right there. And then George Bush took that and spun it in a different direction, right? So that's interesting, right? That George Bush, the conservative war hawk, kind of partnered with Dorothy Day, the left-wing, anti-war anarchist, right? Because they agreed on that one perspective. So I think that it's good. It's very healthy unless someone does something overtly racist, don't say it, right? Don't say that. It causes, and I see a lot of elitism too, that, sometimes people pick on people who are, poor and say, oh, those people are ignorant. Why not, instead of going in there with that perspective, do you know these people that we're condemning, that we're judging, that we're calling racist, right? And if we don't know them personally, then reserve judgment, So I'll just throw that out there. Thank you.
No, I appreciate that. I think that the systems certainly perpetuate that systemic racism, right? But an individual may not have that belief. There's the other quote of like poor people, every American considers themselves a temporarily embarrassed millionaire. Of like, yeah, this is where I am right now, but this is not where I'm going to be. And that's certainly another aspect of it. And this is another great reason to build relationships and to be talking about what our moral call and our moral leadership needs us to do. Jimmy, you've got your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to thank both Patrick and Andrew for their comments, and they're both right. The thing that bothers me about all of this is so many of folks who proudly profess their Christianity are so guilty of othering, and especially folks who are, less well off. And we did, I think it was Mary Beth talked about, we do a great job with charity. We just had a food drive at my church yesterday. We collected almost 3,000 pounds of food that we delivered to the local food pantry. Trying to get that same congregation to engage in with our congressional representatives and senators to talk about the Farm Bill, which is up for renewal this year. Right now, the House version is proposing a $12,000 cut. And that's both domestic and international poverty programs that are going to be impacted by that. And so, just to get folks to pick up the phone and call in or send an email, and it's crickets. And so we've got a brand new pastor. He's been on board less than a month. So hopefully he's going to be more receptive to speaking from the altar about, we can change this, but we need to engage. I heard him say this weekend that we asked for volunteers. No, we're not asking you to volunteer. We're asking you to live your faith. What a powerful concept. So,
Oh, I love
thank you.
that. Yeah. Thank you. And Lynn, I see your hand up as well.
Yeah, we started a book club at our church a couple years back on social justice and racial equity. And so the way we look at it is we're educating people within the church. A lot of people who signed up were already pretty much on board, but not everyone. We have a lot of interesting conversations and we do challenge each other. We also have a book cart, and the pastor supports this, and it's in the bulletin. It's in the monthly newsletter. We provide books for free for people to read if they don't want to join our group. We meet every week, and it's been going on for about almost 3 years. And so what we think we can do is make a difference in the people that we come in contact with, so we can challenge people's ideas. And when it comes to racism, and we also have some books for kids that we have introduced, and we're, if anyone is interested in hearing more about it, I'd be happy to tell you how you could do that in your congregation. And it seems like can seem like a drop in the bucket, like, are we going to make a difference? But I think it's just one of many things that can be done. And our pastor is very much behind it, and I think her messages and sermons are, go along those lines too. So anyway, and we have stuff up on our homepage on our website. It's Redeemer Lutheran Church in McLean. If people want to just see what it's about, it's all up there.
Thank you. Yeah, that is really good. And I think one thing you said, it might feel like a drop in the bucket, and might be a drop or 2 drops, or like every time you say something, it's another drop. But like, you need all those drops to fill up the bucket in a way. Someone asked in the chat, how do you educate people who don't want to listen? And I think that's hard and something we might get to, but there's a lot of people who aren't a total brick wall, who might be interested in listening or finding out something, or who might just feel too busy to learn this stuff. And those folks are maybe a better starting ground of like, maybe everybody's not like fully on board, but they're not deeply and essentially opposed. It's just a matter of like, I don't have time to think about it. Public policy is not my thing. Justice is not my thing. Who really cares? I'm just going to buy the cheap this, that, or the other. But in fact, like Jimmy was talking about with the Farm Bill, like these voices make a difference. And especially because I cannot end a meeting without mentioning that this year's Virginia elections are hugely important. And as I talk to people, my friends, half of them don't even know there's an election this year, let alone that they've been redistricted, they're in new districts, they have new candidates, and that those candidates the laws that they pass will have a real impact on people's lives, both on responding to poverty and just every other aspect. So you can start with the ones who just don't even know, and then maybe work your way to the ones who are deeply ingrained. My first suggestion for talking to people who don't want to listen is to find what you can agree on and start there. You know, if you're both Lutheran, like Lynn was just saying, like start with being Lutheran and how Luther thought that like Christians maybe needed to reform the state to be a little more caring. Like maybe we just start there. But that might be too much. And starting with the people who are not as involved and not as aware is a very, very important step forward. This has been a really great conversation, and I would love to continue it. I do recommend I recommend signing up for the waiting list for the Tuesday book session if you'd like on Poverty by America, and I will send out the sign up link for that. And if it's ready by the time I send out my follow-up email, I will also include the sign-up link for our new Wednesday session that'll be coming up in August to review this book and probably continue some similar conversations to the ones we've had today. Thank you all so much again for being here. Any other questions? I can hang out for a couple more minutes. But again, I just so appreciate you guys being voices within the faith community to raise up these issues of justice for the broader public and for your own congregations.